In this video, I would like to talk about Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 horror romantic gothic film, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think this is probably Francis Ford Coppola's best film next to the first two Godfather films. It's beautifully made, beautifully shot, and also highly innovative in how the set design and other aspects are used. I'm assuming that most of you have seen it, so again, if you haven't, switch off because it's full of spoilers. Those of you who had watched it are aware that Gary Oldman plays Count Dracula, and Winona Ryder plays Mina, Anthony Hopkins plays Van Helsing, and Keanu Reeves plays Jonathan Harker. This is a problem for a lot of people. They claim that Keanu Reeves' performance is flat and rather cardboard. I disagree completely. That's how I would imagine Jonathan Harker to be, and this is an important aspect in how the film progresses. It plays an upper middle class Englishman in Victorian London who exists on the cusp of the aristocrat, and his personality would be cardboard. He wouldn't have the pedigree, as they used to say back then, to be an aristocrat, and anything he achieves in his life will purely be because of his career and his education and his social circle. And this is why he's not marrying Mina, because he doesn't feel he has the right cultural and social credentials in order to be a correct husband for her. That is a cardboard view of life, and that's why I think Keanu Reeves plays the part very, very well. The story begins in 1462 with Vlad Dracula, who's a member of the Order of the Dragon. The Order of the Dragon is based on a real secret society that exists to this day called the Sacred Order of the Dragon, and it was created in order to defend Europe against the Turks. And that's what happens in the beginning of this film. Vlad Dracula comes back from a victory over the Turks, which is portrayed in a remarkable silhouette shadow puppet type way that then echoed later on in the movie in the cinema scene. The red sky and the black figures kicks the film off in a very powerful way. In fact, in many ways this film is more like a fantasy movie in how it's shot and plays along, rather than a Victorian Gothic horror romance. Upon victory over the Turk, he finds out that his wife Elisabetta has committed suicide after the Turks have fired an arrow into the castle saying that her husband Vlad Dracula has been killed. The priest then proceeds to tell him that his wife's soul is condemned for committing suicide. Dracula then goes into a psychotic rage and commits blasphemy, desecrating the chapel, and renounces his fate, declaring that he will rise from the grave to avenge Elisabetta with all the powers of darkness. Then there's an incredible scene where he stabs the stone cross in the chapel with his sword, which begins blood, and it trickles out and he begins to drink it, transforming him into Dracula the vampire. Now this is an important point to bring into this stage. What we're looking at here is the rejection of Christianity and the rejection of Islam, the two Abrahamic religions that have fought over Europe for centuries. What's really happening is Dracula is returning to being a pagan. The two sides both serve the same Middle Eastern Abrahamic god, and on both sides they let him down. Both sides he gave everything he had, and both sides of that Abrahamic god betrayed him, which is not unusual because the Old Testament is filled with stories of Jehovah betraying people and testing people. And that's what I see this film as. I don't know if Francis Ford Coppola sees the film this way. How I see it is a manifesto for paganism. The story of paganism and its conflict with Christianity is perfectly summed up in so much of this film. Vlad Dracula's betrayal of his Christian faith over the anguish of the death of his wife could be seen as blasphemy being liberation. What exactly is the blood which gushes forth from the cross? The blood of his pagan ancestors murdered by the god of the Middle East, just like his wife was murdered by the god of the Middle East. Is the blood gushing from the cross a symbol of this? Then the film cuts back to Jonathan Harker, again played very correctly by Keanu Reeves, being told he has to go to Transylvania to meet Count Dracula after his colleague Renfield had gone mysteriously insane following his own trip there. Harker travels to Transylvania to arrange Dracula's real estate acquisitions in London, including Carfax Abbey, and that's also significant. Why does he want a site of early Christian incursion into England? Eventually, after a remarkable trip across Eastern Europe and into Transylvania, where the use of model train is very effectively done in terms of creating an otherworldly feel, the whole process of the journey, and as it was in Bram Stoker's novel is almost seen as shamanic. The journey across Europe, across the Danube, is seen in that sense. It's not just a geographic journey, it's a journey in a powerful spiritual sense. One very remarkable scene where Harker is basically thrown off the coach that he's on, and there's two gypsies in there, and one says, "You are cursed," and hands him a crucifix. Now, this is interesting. Is he actually cursed by Dracula, or is he cursed by being a Christian in a land where Christianity barely has a foothold? And this is what was represented by the two gypsy women. And again, they carry an element of sexuality about them. One of them has a mask over her face made from coins. Count Dracula even refers to Transylvania as his beautiful realm, almost to imply that it's another world, another place, an altered reality. And wolves play a very prominent part in this movie, again symbolizing pagan Europe. In order to enter the castle, there's an interesting scene where the coach that he's on now, driven by an almost Lord of the Rings looking type character, passes over a blue flame. While Harker is having dinner with Dracula, the Count announces that he is the last of his kind. What does he mean by that exactly? And then there's a use of shadows as Dracula moves through the castle around Harker. The shadows are projected in very interesting and unnatural ways. Again, there's strong Jungian aspects to this. The big map of London behind him is also interesting in that Dracula has acquired properties in specific locations. Harker thinks it's because he wants to increase the real estate value, but they don't actually go into where they're located. Now, Bram Stoker was a member of the Golden Dawn, and there's nothing new about this idea of strategic places on maps or in countries or in regions located according to magical symbols such as the pentagram and the hexagram. Again, this would have been Bram Stoker's magical education within the Golden Dawn making its way into the novel. The first scene in which Mina appears, she is titillated and disgusted by the sexuality in a copy of the Arabian Nights. This immediately puts us in a place of what kind of woman she is. She's not sexually liberated, where her friend Lucy is, and there's almost a lesbian type dynamic between them. Lucy is also promiscuous, is involved with three men, including one Texan called Quincy. Now, he represents in many ways the continuation of the war against paganism into North America. There's no difference between Quincy slaughtering Eastern European pagans, gypsies, or slaughtering redskins in Texas. And the continuing use of models in scenery and settings just adds the whole dreamy aspect of the film. We're then given an insight into the mind of Renfield in the asylum. He's become a kind of an inverse shaman, is now in telepathic communication with Dracula. Now, what this really says also is that he's broken away from the Western mold, and Dracula is about magic. It's about the pagan magic revived, and its conflict directly with science, both in the asylum, where the scientists are trying to understand the mentally ill, and also Van Helsing, who somehow straddles the world between science and mysticism. The idea of immortality for vampires, and this is what Renfield craves, an allegory for reincarnation. Like most non-Abrahamic religions, reincarnation was central to European paganism. You came back. The crucifix is a repulsion of the idea. It's seen as a means of ending reincarnation. It's something of a harness or a bars on a cage. Back in Transylvania, Harper begins to self-destruct as a Western Christian Englishman, and the castle almost represents his own rehabilitation back into an authentic European pagan. Dracula's three females in the crypt absolutely are evocative of the idea of the tripartite goddesses in paganism. The Morriganna, made up of the Morrigan, the Maca and the Bave, and of course the three Norns of Norse and Germanic mythology. The symbolic bloodletting is almost like they're bleeding the Western Christian out of him. Harper writes back to Mina in London and tells her that he has to remain in the castle for a month. Again, that's a lunar cycle, looking at the idea from a pagan revival story, going back to the lunar calendar. Dracula also has a devoted army of gypsy servants. Now, the fact that they're gypsies is important. Gypsies are a people who have not been fully conquered by Christianity, and this is why they have been victimized. They straddle a strange world between Hinduism, Christianity, paganism, and their own beliefs, having originally come from India. Therefore, they act as an intermediary or a buffer between Dracula's pagan revival world and the secular and religious world of the Christians within Europe. Mina's friend Lucy then decides that she's going to marry a lord, and during a storm, while in the maze in the garden where they live, she has a lesbian kiss with Mina. At this moment, during the rainstorm, the ship carrying Dracula and his servants sails with his own home soil, and the carrying of the soil is interesting as well. The idea of the pagan being grounded in the soil of their land rather than in the imaginary god in the sky or in the soil of the Middle East. As the ship sails towards England, the asylum inmates go into chaos. Upon arriving in England, Dracula has transformed into a wolfman. This was a very confusing element for many people who watched the film. They didn't understand, why is a vampire now a werewolf? He's not really a werewolf, he's a wolf. The wolf is symbolized again of the wild feral European, the one that exists outside Christian respectability. And this is why he copulates with Lucy in the garden among pagan classical statues. We have some beautiful street scenes of Victorian London in which he encounters Mina on the street. While trying to flirt with her, he asks her if he go to see the cinema. She says, if you seek culture, visit a museum. What kind of culture is in a museum? The statues of the pagan classical world. We also see in the background a sandwich board advertising man carrying an advertisement for the Lyceum Theatre, again an ancient Roman title. Mina and Dracula inside the cinema tells us about the beginning of technology, and that technology can be used as a means to reprogram people. And this is why the wolf appears in the cinema and terrorizes everybody out except Mina, pressed by Dracula, taming the wolf. Is Van Helsing a good guy, or is he just another version of the witch finder or the witch burner or the crusader, destroying anything that isn't Christian or Abrahamic? What is a stake through the heart? It's a low-level crucifixion. Upon arriving at the house in order to help Lucy, there's one brilliant scene. Van Helsing gives a soliloquy about the nature of the vampire, the undead. Undead, what does that suggest again? They do not die, they reincarnate. And he's standing beside what appears to be a standing stone, and then a raven flies by. A lot of people miss this scene, but it's very important. Van Helsing is using the magic of the pagans and the magic of the ancestors to fight the ancestors. Then something of a platonic leading towards a romantic relationship begins between Mina as she's liberated by Count Dracula in one beautiful scene where he shares a glass of absinthe with her, the green fairy, the psychedelic alcohol. Mina's physical appearance starts to change. She looks less prim and proper and almost looks like a gypsy herself. There's also some very interesting cinematography techniques that we know from Alfred Hitchcock movies of the background and the foreground both being equally in focus. Then we cut back to Transylvania, where Harper escapes from the castle and is rescued by 3 nuns and brought to a convent. They almost seem like the anti-Norns. The nuns write to Mina requesting that she come to the convent and marry Jonathan Harker, which she does. She travels across Europe to become an unpagan again. Van Helsing refers to Lucy, who's now a vampire herself, as the devil's concubine, meaning that she's really a pagan. In one excellent scene, we have a juxtaposition of Mina marrying Harper at the convent in Transylvania and Dracula as the wolf devouring Lucy. From this point on, Mina is no longer the same woman she was at the start of the film. She's now always in danger, and this is the message we're given. If you're a pagan or even a semi-pagan, you are in danger. Van Helsing will come for you, crusaders will come for you, witchfinder generals will come for you. You'll always be a witch for the burning. You're being constantly told that not being a Christian or an Abrahamic in an Abrahamic Christian world, there's always going to be a death sentence on you. And the stake through the heart is the killing of reincarnation. Consciousness is replaced with hell, rebirth replaced with resurrection. It's also interesting, during many of the night scenes you see Masonic pyramids and columns, and they're shown all out through both the rural and urban scenes in the film. Eventually Van Helsing and the three men decide that they have to kill Lucy, and they wait for her in the crypt while she comes back carrying a baby. The baby represents Lucy's own rebirth again, and they're killing her so she cannot be reborn. This is what the life eternal, the vampire story really means. Reincarnation, transmigration of souls, being reborn. And what they're effectively doing by decapitating Lucy, putting a stake through her heart, is stopping her from reincarnating, as symbolized by the baby that she's holding. They then make their way to the abbey to destroy the coffins containing the home soil of Transylvania. And although he's supposed to be a bat suspended upside down from the top of the abbey, he looks more like a goblin. He then transforms into a green mist, the green fairy. So we're back to the whole folklore being other supernatural realities beyond that portrayed in the Bible. This is also shown again when Van Helsing throws holy water upon the Transylvania soil and a serpent emerges. Again, serpent, very indicative of paganism, as we know from the St. Patrick's story in Ireland. Then we get the classic line of, "I love you too much to condemn you to death." What Dracula is saying is that Mina will always be game for the Christians. He does not want to make her the victim of the likes of Van Helsing and other Abrahamic bounty hunters. He cannot condemn her to death in a society where only the Christian is allowed to live. She even utters that wonderful line, "Take me away from all this death." She doesn't want to die. She wants to reincarnate. Then Van Helsing and the posse, including the Texas Quincy, make their own way towards Transylvania, and what this is basically is a Victorian crusade. They're going back to the east to destroy the pagans. And Mina becomes even more intoxicated by the spiritual state of being a pagan as they cross the Danube. And then again we have Quincy shooting the gypsies, and this is no different than shooting other pagan people, the Native Americans in North America. As Dracula makes his way for the final showdown outside the castle, Mina becomes something of a pagan goddess. As the sun is going down, the Son of God is receding. At night time, the pagan lives. The occult. Mina points the rifle at Jonathan and says, "When my time comes, will you do the same to me?" Meaning what was done to Lucy. This almost has a cathartic or an epiphany effect upon Van Helsing, who by his own admission admits that he's a crusader when he says, "We have all become God's madmen." There's one part in this film that's a bit annoying for me personally. It's the final scene where you have a kind of a Christian resurrection, Dracula lying down where he's dying, with the light of God coming to get him. If this really means that, or if it means something else, or if the film company interjected the idea into this that anyone who goes against Christianity will be punished in order to sell the movie in America, and particularly the Bible Belt, I don't know. But the film is definitely a very beautiful, well-made and interesting film. I enjoy it immensely. I've seen it many times, and it's a visual extravaganza. If you watch it repeatedly, as I have over the years, more and more you become aware that it's not a story about hunting vampires. It's a story about hunting pagans.